The blood on the chapel steps had dried to rust by the time Josephine Nelson arrived that evening, though she did not see it in the fading light of September 1878. Silverton, Colorado sat nestled in the San Juan Mountains like a secret waiting to be told, and tonight that secret tasted of pine and coming snow. Josephine's worn boots made soft sounds against the wooden planks as she climbed toward the small white chapel that served the mining town's faithful. Her shawl pulled tight against the mountain chill that came early this high up. The door creaked as she pushed it open, stepping into the dimness lit only by two candles burning near the simple wooden cross at the front. The chapel was empty, as she had hoped. She needed this solitude, this quiet space away from the boarding house where she worked from dawn until her hands ached and her feet begged for mercy. Mrs. Calloway was not an unkind employer, but the work was endless, and the loneliness of being 22 years old with no family and no prospects weighed heavier than any laundry basket. Josephine slid into the third pew from the front, the same spot she always chose, and lowered herself to her knees on the hard floor. The wood bit into her kneecaps through her faded calico dress, but she welcomed the discomfort. It kept her present, kept her from drifting too far into the despair that sometimes threatened to swallow her whole. She clasped her hands together and closed her eyes. "Dear Lord," she whispered into the empty space, "I know I do not have the right to ask for much. I know there are others with greater burdens than mine, but if you could see fit to show me what path I should take, I would be grateful. I am lost, and I am tired, and I do not know how much longer I can continue this way." Her voice broke on the last words, and she pressed her hands harder together until her knuckles went white. She had come west 2 years ago after her parents died of fever back in Missouri. Her only brother had disappeared during the war, and she had no other family to speak of. The promise of work and a fresh start had drawn her to Colorado, but the reality had been harder than she imagined. The mining town was rough, full of men who looked at her with hunger she pretended not to see, and women who kept their distance from a young woman alone without protection or proper standing. "Please," she continued, tears slipping down her cheeks now, "please just show me I am not forgotten. Show me there is still purpose in this life, still reason to hope." She stayed like that for nearly an hour, praying and weeping quietly, letting the solitude wash over her like cool water. When she finally rose, her knees protested and her eyes felt swollen, but her heart felt marginally lighter. It was something. It had to be enough. Outside, the September evening had deepened into true night, stars beginning to prick through the darkening sky like diamond chips scattered across blue velvet. The mountain air bit sharper now, and Josephine pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped out onto the chapel porch. She stopped short. A man stood at the base of the steps, hat in his hands, looking up at her with eyes that caught the lamplight from the saloon down the street. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and a face that might have been carved from the mountains themselves, all strong lines and quiet strength. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips, but there was something in his posture that spoke of patience rather than threat. "Miss," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel underfoot, "I hope I did not startle you. I have been waiting to make sure you got home safe." Josephine blinked, confusion overriding her initial alarm. "I beg your pardon, name's Kieran Walker," he said, taking a step back to give her space. "I saw you coming up here earlier, and with dark falling and the town being what it is, I thought it best someone keep watch. There was trouble earlier today near the Lucky Strike Saloon. Miners got into it over a card game. One of them is dead, 2 more wounded. Sheriffs locked up the shooter, but feelings are running high and men are drunk. It is not a safe night for a lady to be walking alone. She studied him more carefully now, taking in the details. His face was weathered but not old, perhaps 25 or 26. His eyes were a startling blue-gray, like storm clouds over the peaks, and they held no deception that she could see. His hands, turning his hat in a slow circle, were calloused but clean. He had a certain quality about him that reminded her of the few truly good men she had known in her life. Steady, grounded. "That is kind of you, Mr. Walker," she said carefully, descending the steps. "But I have made this walk many times. I know the way." "I do not doubt it, miss. But knowing the way and being safe on it are two different things tonight." There was logic in his words that she could not dispute. She had heard the commotion earlier from the boarding house, the shouts and the sound of breaking glass, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Mrs. Calloway had locked all the doors and ordered everyone to stay inside until things settled. Josephine had waited until the town seemed quiet again before slipping out to the chapel. "Very well," she conceded. "I am staying at the Calloway boarding house on Pine Street." "I know it," Kieran said, settling his hat back on his head. "If you do not mind, I will walk a few paces behind. That way folks will not get the wrong idea about your reputation." The consideration in those words touched something in her chest. Most men in Silverton would not have thought twice about a woman's reputation, especially not the reputation of someone like her, who had no family name to protect her. They began walking, Josephine in front and Kieran keeping his promised distance behind. The main street was quieter than usual, though she could hear raised voices still coming from the Lucky Strike. Most of the respectable businesses had closed early, their windows dark. Only the saloons showed light and life, and that life had a dangerous edge to it tonight. "How did you come to be in Silverton, Mr. Walker?" she asked over her shoulder, surprising herself with the question. Perhaps it was the darkness that made conversation feel safer, or perhaps it was simply the kindness of his gesture that made her curious. "Drifted here about 3 months back," he replied. "I have been working as a ranch hand for the Pattersons spread up in the valley. Good work, honest pay. Better than some of the places I have been." "And where have you been before this?" "Here and there. Kansas mostly, Wyoming for a spell. My folks had a farm outside of Lawrence, but that all ended during the war." His voice tightened on those last words, and she heard the weight of old grief in them. "After that, I just kept moving, seemed easier than staying still." She understood that sentiment more than he could know. "I came from Missouri," she offered, "after my parents passed. My brother disappeared during the war as well. I suppose we both know something about loss." "Yes, miss, I suppose we do." They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps echoing on the wooden boardwalk. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A baby cried from one of the small houses they passed, normal sounds of life continuing despite the violence that had marked the day. "What were you praying for?" Kieran asked suddenly, then immediately seemed to regret it. "Forgive me. That is too personal a question. I have no right." Josephine slowed her pace slightly, considering. Something about this stranger felt safe in a way she had not experienced in a long time. "I was praying for direction," she said finally, "for hope that my life might be more than just work and weariness. I know that sounds foolish." "It does not sound foolish at all." She glanced back at him and found him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, sympathy, perhaps, or understanding. "You pray, Mr. Walker?" "Used to," he said. "Lost the habit somewhere along the way. But standing outside that chapel tonight, listening to the quiet, I found myself thinking maybe I should take it up again." Her heart did a strange little flutter in her chest. She turned her attention back to the street ahead, afraid her face might betray the sudden warmth she felt. The boarding house came into view, its windows glowing with lamplight. Mrs. Calloway kept a good house, clean and respectable, and Josephine was grateful for the work even if it exhausted her. But looking at it now, knowing she would rise before dawn to begin the same tasks she did every day, the same endless cycle, she felt the weight of her loneliness settle back on her shoulders. They stopped at the front gate, and Kieran kept his distance, staying on the far side of the fence. "Thank you for walking me home," Josephine said, meaning it. "It was kind of you to wait. It was no trouble, Miss Nelson, Josephine Nelson, Miss Nelson." He touched the brim of his hat. "I hope your prayers are answered." Something made her bold, maybe the darkness or the tenderness in his voice. "Will you be at church on Sunday?" He looked surprised by the question, then thoughtful. "I had not planned on it, but yes, I believe I will be." She smiled then, a real smile that felt strange on her face because it had been so long since she had reason for one. "Good night, Mr. Walker." "Good night, Miss Nelson." She walked up the path to the boarding house door, feeling his eyes on her back until she was safely inside. Only then did she hear his footsteps retreating back toward the main street. Inside, the house was quiet. Most of the boarders had already retired for the evening. Mrs. Calloway looked up from her knitting in the parlor as Josephine passed. "You are back late from your prayers," the older woman observed, her voice neutral but her eyes sharp. "There was trouble in town," Josephine explained. "A kind gentleman walked me home to ensure my safety." Mrs. Calloway's eyebrows rose. "A gentleman?" "Yes, madam, very proper and respectful." The older woman returned to her knitting, but Josephine caught the small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Best get to bed then. Tomorrow's laundry will not wash itself." Josephine climbed the narrow stairs to the small room she shared with another girl who worked in the dry goods store. Emma was already asleep, her breathing soft and steady in the darkness. Josephine changed into her nightdress as quietly as she could and slipped into her own narrow bed. But sleep did not come easily. She kept thinking about Kieran Walker standing at the base of the chapel steps, hat in hands, waiting in the dark just to make sure she was safe. She thought about his voice, rough and gentle at the same time. She thought about the way he had asked about her prayers, and told her it was not foolish to want more from life. Maybe her prayer was being answered after all. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of crystalline autumn day that made the mountains look close enough to touch. Josephine wore her best dress, a dark blue cotton that she had carefully mended and pressed the night before. It was not fancy, but it was clean and modest, and she had pinned her dark hair up in a simple style that she hoped looked presentable. Emma had teased her about taking extra care with her appearance, but Josephine had brushed off the comments with what she hoped was casual indifference. The truth was her heart had been beating faster than normal since she woke, and her hands had trembled slightly as she fastened the buttons of her dress. The chapel looked different in daylight, less mysterious and more humble. It was really just a simple building of white painted wood with a small steeple and plain glass windows. But it was the only church in Silverton, serving all denominations equally, and it was always full on Sunday mornings. Josephine arrived early, as was her habit, and took her usual seat in the third pew. She kept her eyes on the simple cross at the front, trying not to look toward the door every few seconds. He had said he would come, but words spoken in darkness sometimes lost their weight in daylight. She would understand if he changed his mind. The chapel began to fill with familiar faces. The Hawthorns with their 6 children, old Mr. Fisher who ran the general store, the Yardley family who owned the largest mine in the area, Mrs. Calloway came in with several of the boarding house residents, including Emma, who gave Josephine a knowing look before sliding into a pew near the back. The circuit preacher, Reverend Matthews took his place at the front. He was preparing to begin when the door opened one last time. Kieran Walker stepped inside. He had cleaned up considerably since Friday night. His hair was still damp like he had just bathed, combed back from his face. He wore a clean shirt and dark trousers, his gun belt notably absent. His eyes scanned the congregation until they found her, and something in his expression softened. He moved down the aisle and, to her shock and delight, slid into the pew beside her. "Miss Nelson," he said quietly, removing his hat. "Mr. Walker." Her voice came out breathier than she intended. "I am glad you came. I told you I would." There was something solid in those words, a promise kept, and it made her chest feel warm. The service began, and Josephine tried to focus on Reverend Matthews's words about faith and perseverance, but she was acutely aware of Kieran sitting beside her. She could smell soap and leather, and something else, something clean and masculine that made her pulse quicken. When they stood to sing, his voice was a pleasant baritone that blended with the congregation, and when they sat again, his shoulder was close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. After the service ended, people lingered outside the chapel as they always did, exchanging news and gossip. Josephine felt suddenly shy as she and Kieran stepped out into the sunshine, aware of the curious looks being directed their way. "Would you permit me to walk you back to the boarding house?" Kieran asked, hat in hand again. "I would like that." They started down the street together, this time walking side by side instead of one behind the other. It felt different in daylight, more real somehow, more significant. "I did some thinking after Friday night," Kieran said as they walked. "About what you said about praying for direction and hope." "Yes. I realized I have been drifting for a long time now, moving from place to place, taking work where I could find it, never settling. I told myself it was because I liked the freedom of it, but the truth is I was just running. From memories, from grief, from the past." Josephine looked up at him, seeing the honesty in his face. "That sounds lonely." It is." He met her eyes. "But standing outside that chapel, waiting for you, something shifted. I cannot explain it exactly. It just felt like maybe I was where I was supposed to be for the first time in years." Her breath caught. "I felt something too, when I came out and saw you there. Like maybe my prayer was already being answered." They had reached the boarding house, but neither of them seemed eager to part. Kieran shifted his weight, clearly working up to something. "Miss Nelson, I know this is forward and you do not know me well, but I would like to call on you properly if you would permit it. I would like the chance to know you better." Joy bloomed in her chest, bright and warm as sunshine. "I would like that very much, Mr. Walker." "Kieran," he said. "Please call me Kieran when we are alone." "Then you must call me Josephine." He smiled, a slow warming of his features that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her heart stutter. "Josephine," he repeated like he was tasting her name. "That is a beautiful name. My mother chose it. She wanted something elegant even though we were simple people." "There is nothing simple about you," Kieran said softly. The compliment made her cheeks warm. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you go to chapel alone in the dark to pray. I know you work hard enough that your hands are red from scrubbing. I know you have survived losses that would have broken lesser people. I know you still have hope enough to pray for better things." He paused. "That tells me more than 1,000 conversations might." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me." His expression grew tender. "That is the easiest thing I have ever done." They stood there for a moment longer, just looking at each other, something unspoken building between them. Then Mrs. Calloway's voice called from the house. "Josephine, Sunday dinner will not cook itself." The spell broke and Josephine laughed. "I must go. Mrs. Calloway needs help with the meal." Of course, may I call on you next Sunday, after church? Yes. Yes, please do. Until then, Josephine. Until then, Kieran. She walked up the path to the house, glancing back once to find him still standing there, watching her with that same soft expression. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years. The week that followed passed in a strange haze of anticipation. Josephine went about her usual tasks with new energy, her mind only half on the laundry and cooking and cleaning, while the other half replayed her conversations with Kieran over and over. Emma noticed the change in her mood and teased her mercilessly about it, but it was good-natured teasing, and Josephine did not mind. "You are glowing," Emma declared on Wednesday as they hung sheets to dry in the yard behind the boarding house. "I have never seen you like this." "I do not know what you mean," Josephine protested, but she could not suppress her smile. "Oh yes, you do. That cowboy from church has you all turned around. Mrs. Calloway says he is calling on you proper." "He is." Josephine pinned a sheet to the line, making sure it hung straight. "He seems like a good man, Emma. A truly good man." "They all seem good at first," Emma said, but there was no real cynicism in her voice. She was only 19 and had not yet had her heart broken, but she worked in a store that catered to miners and cowboys, and she had seen enough of rough behavior to make her cautious. "I know. I am being careful, but there is something different about Kieran, something steady." "Well, I hope you are right. Lord knows you deserve some happiness." Thursday evening, Josephine was helping serve dinner to the boarders when a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Raised voices, the sound of horses, someone shouting orders. Mrs. Calloway went to the window and peered out. "It is the sheriff," she announced, "and several deputies. They are searching the buildings." One of the boarders, a grizzled miner named Hank, grunted. "That fellow who shot up the Lucky Strike last week got himself a partner. Word is they are looking for him. Think he might be hiding out somewhere in town." Josephine felt a chill run through her. The violence of Silverton had seemed distant on Sunday morning with Kieran beside her in church, but it was always there, lurking at the edges of civilized life. The evening passed without further incident, though she could hear the searchers working their way through the town for hours. When she finally went to bed, she found herself praying again, this time for safety, for peace, for Sunday to come quickly. Saturday brought rain, cold mountain rain that turned the streets to mud and made everyone irritable. Josephine spent most of the day indoors, helping Mrs. Calloway with mending and food preparation. But even the gray weather could not dampen her spirits entirely. Tomorrow she would see Kieran again. She went to bed early that night, wanting Sunday to arrive sooner. But sleep was elusive. The rain drummed on the roof, and her mind wandered to thoughts of blue-gray eyes and a voice like gravel underfoot. She wondered what he was doing right now, if he was thinking of her too. Sunday morning the rain had stopped, leaving everything washed clean and bright. Josephine dressed with care again, this time in a light gray dress that brought out the green in her eyes. Her hands were steadier today, her anticipation tempered with a growing certainty that something significant was happening in her life. At church, Kieran was already there when she arrived, sitting in the same pew they had shared the week before. He stood as she approached and smiled at her, and the warmth in his eyes made her feel like she was the only person in the world. "Good morning, Josephine." "Good morning, Kieran." They sat together through the service, and this time when their hands brushed on the shared hymnal, neither of them pulled away. The contact sent little sparks of awareness through her arm. After the service, Kieran offered his arm as they walked from the chapel, and Josephine took it, enjoying the solid strength of him beside her. "I have been thinking all week about today," Kieran admitted as they strolled slowly toward the boarding house. The sun was warm on their faces, and the mountains rose sharp and beautiful against the blue sky. "About seeing you again." "I have been thinking about it too," Josephine confessed. "I want to know everything about you," Kieran said. "Where you grew up, what you dream about, what makes you laugh." "I want to know it all." So she told him. They walked past the boarding house and kept going, following the road that led up into the foothills. And she told him about growing up in a small town in Missouri, about her father who had been a blacksmith and her mother who had kept the most beautiful garden. She told him about her brother Thomas, who had been 5 years older and had enlisted with such patriotic fervor at the start of the war, writing letters home full of confidence and hope until the letters stopped coming altogether. "We never found out what happened to him," she said quietly. "My mother died not knowing if her son was alive or dead. That was the worst part for her, the not knowing." Kieran's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "I am sorry. The war took too much from too many people. Did you fight?" "No. I was too young when it started, and by the time I was old enough, my parents were already gone. Raiders came through our county, burned everything. They said they were fighting for the cause, but really they were just using the war as an excuse to steal and destroy. I was 16. I hid in the root cellar and heard my parents die." His voice was steady, but she could hear the pain beneath it, old and deep. "After that, I could not stay. I took what I could carry and started moving west. I am so sorry, Kieran. It was a long time ago, but you never really forget. You just learn to carry it differently." They walked in silence for a while, both lost in memories of loss. But there was something comforting about the shared understanding between them. They both knew grief. They both knew what it meant to rebuild a life from ruins. "What do you dream about?" Kieran asked eventually, circling back to his earlier question. "What do you want from life?" Josephine considered the question carefully. "I suppose I want what most people want. A home, family, purpose. I want to matter to someone. I want to build something lasting, something good." She paused, then added quietly, "I want to love and be loved." Kieran stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "You matter to me, Josephine. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I need you to know that you matter." Her throat tightened with emotion. "You matter to me too." He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. The touch was feather light, but it sent shivers through her entire body. "I am not a wealthy man," Kieran said. "I do not have land or prospects beyond the work I can do with my hands. But I am honest and I work hard, and I would do everything in my power to build a good life. I want you to know that about me." "I do not care about wealth," Josephine replied. "My parents had little money, but they were rich in love, and that made our home a happy place. That is what I want. That is what matters." They started walking again, but something had shifted between them. The conversation had moved from surface pleasantries to deeper waters, and they both felt the current pulling them forward. "How long have you been working for the Patterson Ranch?" Josephine asked. "3 months, like I said. It is good work. Mr. Patterson is fair, pays on time, treats his hands well. He has been talking about expanding the operation, maybe bringing on some hands permanently instead of just seasonal workers." Kieran hesitated. "He mentioned I might be good for a permanent position if I was interested. Are you?" "Interested, I mean. I am now," Kieran said, looking at her meaningfully. "I was not sure I wanted to settle, but things have changed. My thinking has changed." Josephine's heart raced. She understood what he was saying, what he was implying. He was considering staying in Silverton. For her. They walked for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. Kieran told her about working on ranches across Kansas and Wyoming, about cattle drives and lonely nights under the stars. Josephine told him about the boarding house, about Mrs. Calloway's stern exterior that hid a kind heart, about the small joys she found in her work even when it was exhausting. When they finally returned to the boarding house, the sun was high and warm. Mrs. Calloway was on the porch, ostensibly shaking out a rug but clearly waiting for Josephine's return. "I should go," Josephine said reluctantly. "May I see you again?" Kieran asked. "Not just on Sunday, maybe one evening this week." "Yes, yes, I would like that. Wednesday evening. I could come by after your work is done. We could walk together if the weather holds." "Wednesday evening," Josephine agreed. "I will be ready." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so old-fashioned and tender that it made her eyes burn with unshed tears. "Until Wednesday, then. Until Wednesday." She watched him walk away, tall and straight-backed, before turning to face Mrs. Calloway's knowing look. "That one is different," the older woman observed. "Yes," Josephine agreed. "He is." Mrs. Calloway nodded approvingly. "Good. It is about time you had someone look at you the way that man does." The days until Wednesday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Josephine threw herself into her work to make the time pass faster, but her mind constantly wandered to Kieran. She found herself daydreaming while scrubbing floors, imagining conversations they might have, things she might tell him. Wednesday evening finally arrived. Josephine changed from her work dress into the blue cotton she had worn the first Sunday, and Emma helped her arrange her hair. "You look beautiful," Emma declared. "That cowboy is going to forget his own name when he sees you." "Do not be ridiculous," Josephine protested, but she was pleased nonetheless. Kieran arrived precisely at 7, as punctual as sunrise. He wore a clean shirt and had clearly taken pains with his appearance. When Mrs. Calloway opened the door to him, Josephine watched from the stairs as he removed his hat and spoke to the older woman with perfect courtesy. "Good evening, madam. I am here to call on Miss Nelson if she is available." "She is," Mrs. Calloway said, stepping aside. "But I expect her back by 9 o'clock, Mr. Walker. This is a respectable house." "Yes, madam, I will have her back with time to spare." Josephine descended the stairs, and the way Kieran's face lit up when he saw her made her feel like the most beautiful woman who ever lived. "You look lovely," he said softly. "Thank you. Shall we go?" They walked through the town as evening settled over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Kieran told her about his week at the ranch, about the horses he was helping to train, and the cattle they were moving to lower pastures for the winter. Josephine told him about the new boarder who had arrived, a surveyor from Denver who was mapping the mountain passes. But beneath the surface conversation, there was something else building. A awareness, an attraction that grew stronger each time they were together. When Kieran took her hand as they walked, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. They found themselves at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to forest. There was a large, flat rock overlooking the valley, and they sat together as the sun sank lower, turning the world to fire and shadow. "I spoke to Mr. Patterson yesterday," Kieran said, his voice quiet in the gathering dusk. "About the permanent position." Josephine's heart began to pound. "What did he say?" "He said the job is mine if I want it. Good wages, a cabin on the ranch property. It would mean staying in Silverton year-round, not just for the season." "What did you tell him?" Kieran turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "I told him I needed a few days to think about it. But the truth is, I have already decided. I want to stay, Josephine. I want to build a life here." He paused, then added with quiet intensity, "I want to build a life with you if you will have me." The words hung in the air between them, huge and significant. Josephine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Kieran, we have only known each other 3 weeks. I know. And if you need more time, I understand. I will wait as long as you need. but I also know what I feel and I do not see it changing. You are what I have been searching for all these years, even when I did not know I was searching. You are home to me." A tear slipped down her cheek and he reached up to catch it with his thumb, his touch infinitely gentle. "I feel it too," she whispered. "It frightens me how much I feel it. But I do. When I am with you, everything makes sense. Everything feels right. Then let me court you properly. Let me prove to you that I am worthy of your trust, your affection. I will take the job at the ranch. I will build a good life. And when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will ask you to share that life with me." Josephine turned her hand over in his, threading their fingers together. "Yes, yes, I want that." Kieran smiled, that slow, warm smile that transformed his face, and leaned forward to press his forehead against hers. They sat like that as darkness fell around them, just breathing together, hearts beating in time. "We should get you back," Kieran said eventually, reluctantly. "Before Mrs. Calloway sends a search party." They walked back through the darkening town hand in hand, and when they reached the boarding house, Kieran pulled her into the shadows beside the porch. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with want. "Yes," Josephine breathed. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her softly, tenderly, like she was something precious and fragile. It was Josephine's first kiss, and it was everything she had ever imagined it could be. Sweet and gentle and full of promise. When they parted, both of them were breathing hard. "Good night, Josephine," Kieran whispered. "Good night, Kieran." She floated into the house, her lips still tingling, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The autumn deepened, and with it, Josephine and Kieran's courtship blossomed. They fell into a pattern of seeing each other 3 or 4 times a week. Kieran would ride into town after finishing his work at the ranch, and they would walk together through the streets of Silverton, or sit on the porch of the boarding house talking until the stars came out. Mrs. Calloway proved to be an accommodating chaperone, always present but never intrusive. She seemed to genuinely approve of Kieran, which meant a great deal to Josephine. The older woman's blessing felt almost maternal, filling a void Josephine had carried since losing her own mother. As October arrived and the aspen trees turned gold against the evergreens, Kieran took Josephine to see the cabin that would be his permanent residence. It was small but well built, with a fireplace and 2 rooms and windows that looked out over the valley. "It needs work," Kieran admitted as they stood in the empty main room. "The roof needs patching and the floor could use refinishing, but it is solid. It could be a good home." Josephine walked slowly around the space, imagining it furnished and lived in. A table near the window, curtains in soft colors, a bed in the smaller room covered with quilts, a life built here day by day. "It could be a wonderful home," she said softly. Kieran came to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I keep imagining you here. I know I should not yet, but I cannot help it. I see you at the stove cooking, reading by the fire, waking up in the morning light." His voice dropped lower. "I see a whole life here and you are at the center of it." Josephine turned to face him. 6 weeks had passed since that first night outside the chapel, and in that time her feelings had only grown stronger, deeper, more certain. "I see it too," she admitted. "I try not to let my mind run ahead, but I see it, a life with you, a home with you. How much more time do you need?" Kieran asked, and there was no pressure in the question, only gentle inquiry. "I do not know, not much longer, I think. I just want to be sure. This is forever, Kieran. I need to be sure. I understand, and I will wait." But Josephine was already sure if she was honest with herself. She was sure when she woke each morning with his name on her lips. She was sure when she caught herself humming while she worked, something she had not done in years. She was sure when he kissed her goodbye each evening and her whole body sang with joy. The only thing holding her back was fear. Fear that this happiness was too good to be true. Fear that something would happen to take it away. She had lost so much in her life already. The thought of losing Kieran, of losing this chance at the life she had always wanted, terrified her. One Sunday in late October after church, Kieran asked if she would like to meet Mr. Patterson and see more of the ranch. Josephine agreed eagerly, curious about the place where Kieran spent his days. The Patterson ranch was larger than she had imagined, sprawling across a wide valley with mountains rising on all sides. The main house was substantial, built of logs and stone, with smoke curling from 2 chimneys. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn and multiple corrals. Mr. Patterson himself was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with graying hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. His wife, Sarah, was plump and cheerful with a warm smile that put Josephine immediately at ease. "So you are the young lady who has captured Kieran's attention," Sarah Patterson said, ushering Josephine into the kitchen for tea while the men talked business outside. "He speaks of you constantly." "Does he?" Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "Oh yes. Kieran is usually such a quiet one, keeps his thoughts to himself, but mention your name and he lights up like a lamp. It is lovely to see, truly." They talked for over an hour, and by the time Josephine left with Kieran, she felt like she had made a friend. Sarah Patterson had invited her back anytime, and had made pointed comments about how nice it would be to have another young woman nearby, which made Kieran grin and Josephine blush. "They like you," Kieran said as they rode back toward town in the wagon he had borrowed. "Mr. Patterson told me I would be a fool to let you go. I like them too. They seem like good people. They are. The best." Kieran glanced at her, then back at the road. "Josephine, I need to tell you something." Her heart jumped. "What is it?" "Mr. Patterson is planning to retire in the next few years. He wants to sell the ranch eventually, move back east to be near his daughter and grandchildren. He has been looking for someone to eventually take over the operation, someone he trusts." Josephine waited, sensing there was more. "He spoke to me today. Said if I was interested, if I was planning to stay in Silverton long term, he would consider selling me the ranch. Not right away, but in a few years. He would carry the note himself, work out terms I could manage." "Kieran, that is wonderful. It is a huge opportunity, more than I ever imagined having, but it would mean real roots here, a permanent life, and I need to know." He stopped the wagon and turned to face her fully. "I need to know if that is a life you could see yourself being part of, because I do not want it without you. None of it means anything without you." The fear that had been holding Josephine back suddenly seemed very small and foolish. Here was this good, honest, hard-working man offering her everything she had ever dreamed of: love, home, a future. Why was she hesitating? "Yes," she said. "Yes, Kieran, I can see it. I want it. I want a life with you." His eyes widened. "Josephine, are you saying?" "I am saying I am sure. I do not need more time. I know my heart and it is yours, completely. Forever." Kieran let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, deeper and more passionately than he ever had before. When they finally broke apart, both of them were trembling. "I want to marry you," Kieran said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want to marry you as soon as possible. Will you have me, Josephine? Will you be my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "Yes, yes, yes." He kissed her again and again, until they were both laughing and crying at the same time. Then he pulled a small object from his pocket. It was a simple silver ring with a small blue stone. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing I saved from the fire. I have carried it all these years, never knowing why I kept it. But now I know. I was keeping it for you." Josephine's hands shook as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it was always meant to be there. "I love you," Kieran said, saying the words aloud for the first time. "I love you so much, Josephine." "I love you too," she replied, her voice breaking with joy. "I love you, Kieran. I love you." They sat there in the wagon as the sun set over the mountains, holding each other and planning their future. They would marry soon, before winter set in. Josephine would leave the boarding house and move into the cabin with Kieran. They would work hard and save their money, and in a few years, they would buy the ranch. They would build a life together, a good life full of love and purpose. When Kieran finally drove her back to the boarding house, it was full dark and Mrs. Calloway was waiting on the porch, a knowing look on her face. "I am engaged," Josephine announced, unable to contain her joy. "Kieran has asked me to marry him and I said yes, Mrs." Calloway's stern expression melted into a genuine smile. "Well, it is about time. Come inside, both of you. We need to celebrate properly and discuss the details." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of planning. They decided to marry in the first week of November, which gave them just enough time to make the necessary arrangements without rushing too much. Reverend Matthews agreed to perform the ceremony in the chapel, where Josephine had been praying that fateful night in September. Josephine and Sarah Patterson became fast friends during the preparations. Sarah helped Josephine make over an old dress of pale cream cotton, adding lace at the collar and cuffs to make it suitable for a wedding. Mrs. Calloway contributed a beautiful shawl that had been her own mother's, saying every bride needed something special. Kieran spent his spare time working on the cabin, determined to have it ready for his new wife. He patched the roof, refinished the floors, and even built a new bed frame with his own hands. Mr. Patterson gave them several pieces of furniture from the ranch house attic, including a beautiful carved table and chairs. On the morning of the wedding, Josephine woke with butterflies dancing in her stomach. It was a clear, cold November day, the kind where the air was so crisp it almost hurt to breathe. Emma helped her dress and arrange her hair, weaving in small sprigs of dried flowers that Sarah had brought. "You look like a princess," Emma said, her eyes bright with tears. "Oh, Josephine, I am so happy for you." "Thank you for being here with me," Josephine replied, hugging her friend tightly, "for being my family." The chapel was packed when they arrived. It seemed like half of Silverton had turned out for the wedding. Mrs. Calloway and all the boarding house residents were there. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, beaming. Even some of the ranch hands had cleaned up and come to town to see Kieran married. But Josephine only had eyes for the man waiting at the front of the chapel. Kieran stood tall and straight in his best clothes, his dark hair combed back, his eyes locked on her as she walked down the aisle. The expression on his face was everything she could have hoped for. Love, wonder, joy, and a devotion so pure it made her heart ache. Mrs. Calloway walked beside Josephine, standing in for the father who was no longer there to give her away. When they reached the front, the older woman pressed a kiss to Josephine's cheek and whispered, "Be happy, my dear girl. You deserve all the happiness in the world." Then Josephine's hand was in Kieran's, and Reverend Matthews was beginning the ceremony. The words washed over her in a beautiful blur. She heard herself making promises to love and honor, to remain faithful in good times and bad, in sickness and health, until death parted them. She heard Kieran making the same promises, his voice strong and sure. Then Reverend Matthews was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Kieran was kissing her in front of everyone, not caring who saw, and the congregation was cheering. They were married. After all the loneliness and loss, after all the years of just surviving, Josephine had found this. Love. Home. A future bright with promise. The celebration afterward was held at the boarding house, where Mrs. Calloway had prepared a feast. There was music and dancing, and Josephine found herself passed from partner to partner as everyone wanted to congratulate her. But she kept finding her way back to Kieran, drawn to him like a compass finding north. As the sun began to set, Kieran leaned close and whispered, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Walker, Mrs. Walker?" Her new name, her new life. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." They said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon loaded with their few possessions. As they drove out of town toward the Patterson ranch and the cabin that was now their home, Josephine leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling more content than she had ever thought possible. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For waiting outside the chapel that night, for walking me home, for seeing me when I felt invisible." Kieran pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for praying that night, for giving me a reason to wait, for giving me everything I never knew I needed." The cabin was warm when they arrived, a fire already burning in the fireplace thanks to Mr. Patterson's thoughtfulness. Kieran carried Josephine over the threshold, both of them laughing as he nearly dropped her. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, full of whispered words and tender touches. Kieran was patient with her inexperience, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished and safe. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, it felt like the most natural and right thing in the world. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, watching the firelight dance on the ceiling. "I prayed for hope that night in the chapel," Josephine murmured. "I prayed for direction, for purpose. I never imagined I would get all this." "God is good," Kieran replied. "Even when we cannot see his plan, he is working, bringing two lonely people to the same place at the right time. That is no accident." "No," Josephine agreed, pressing a kiss over his heart. "That is grace." The first winter of their marriage was hard but happy. Snow came early and stayed late in the mountains, and there were days when Kieran could not get to the main ranch house and had to stay close to home. Josephine did not mind. She loved having him near, loved the domestic rhythm they were establishing. She learned to cook on the temperamental stove, with only occasional disasters. Kieran taught her about horses and cattle, and she discovered she had a natural way with animals. They talked for hours by firelight, sharing stories of their pasts, making plans for their future. In January, Josephine realized she was pregnant. The morning sickness confirmed what her body had been trying to tell her, and she chose a snowy evening when they were snowbound in the cabin to tell Kieran. He was stunned, speechless at first, then deliriously happy. He picked her up and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing, then set her down carefully like she was made of glass. "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy," Kieran cupped her face in his hands. "Josephine, I am beyond happy. You have given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. How could I be anything but grateful?" The baby came in early September, almost exactly a year after that first night when Kieran had waited outside the chapel. It was a long, difficult labor, but Sarah Patterson was there to help, and in the end, Josephine delivered a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Josephine's lost brother, and Kieran cried when he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," Kieran whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." Josephine, exhausted but glowing, watched her husband with their son and felt her heart expand even more. She had not known it was possible to love this much. Thomas was a good baby, easy-going and content. Kieran was a devoted father, getting up for night feedings and changing diapers without complaint. Watching him with their son, Josephine fell in love with him all over again. The years unfolded like a beautiful tapestry. Thomas grew strong and healthy, a sturdy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. When he was 2, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, who had Kieran's blue-gray eyes and a temperament as sweet as summer honey. Kieran worked hard at the ranch, proving himself capable and trustworthy. Mr. Patterson began teaching him about the business side of ranching, preparing him to eventually take over. The older man's respect and approval meant a great deal to Kieran, filling some of the void left by his own father's death. In the spring of 1883, when Thomas was 3 and Clara was 1, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson announced they were ready to move east. Their daughter had given birth to another grandchild, and they wanted to be closer to their growing family. It was time to finalize the sale of the ranch to Kieran. The negotiations were fair and generous. Mr. Patterson carried a large portion of the note himself, structuring the payments so Kieran could manage them comfortably. There were legal papers to sign, witnessed by the county clerk, and then the ranch was officially theirs. Kieran Walker, the drifter who had been running from grief for so many years, now owned a substantial piece of Colorado land. He had a wife who loved him, 2 beautiful children, and a future bright with possibility. That night, after the children were asleep, Kieran and Josephine stood on the porch of their cabin, looking out over the land that was now theirs. "You ever think about that night?" Kieran asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "The night I waited outside the chapel." "All the time," Josephine replied, leaning back against his chest. "I think about how lost I was, how hopeless I felt, and then I came outside and you were there. I almost did not stay. I saw you go in and I started to walk away, but something made me stop. Some voice in my head saying to wait, that this mattered, that you mattered. I am so glad you listened to that voice." "Me too." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You saved me, Josephine. I was so lost, just moving through life without really living, but you gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me home." "We saved each other," she corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "I was drowning in loneliness and you threw me a rope. We found each other right when we both needed it most." They stood there for a long time, just holding each other under the stars, thinking about all the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. A woman praying in an empty chapel, a man waiting outside, a walk home that changed everything. The years continued to roll forward. The ranch prospered under Kieran's careful management. He expanded the operation gradually, buying additional land when it became available, improving the breeding stock, modernizing the facilities. He had a natural talent for ranching, and his reputation grew. Other ranchers sought his advice, and he became known as a fair man who kept his word. Josephine thrived in her role as wife and mother. She had a way with people that made the ranch hands loyal and the neighbors friendly. She kept a beautiful home, raised their children with love and discipline, and was Kieran's partner in every sense of the word. When he had big decisions to make about the ranch, he always consulted her first. 2 more children came, another boy they named James and a daughter they called Sarah after Mrs. Patterson. Their home was full of laughter and love, sometimes chaos, but always warmth. The children grew up riding horses before they could walk properly, learning the rhythms of ranch life from an early age. Thomas showed promise of being a natural rancher like his father. Clara was gentle and nurturing, always collecting injured animals to care for. James was adventurous and bold, while little Sarah was observant and thoughtful. Mrs. Calloway came to visit often, especially after she retired from running the boarding house. She became Grandma Calloway to the children, filling that role with obvious delight. Emma married a young lawyer who came to Silverton and settled down, giving Josephine a close friend nearby. Life was not without its challenges. There were harsh winters when they lost cattle. There were injuries and illnesses that frightened them. There were financial pressures and difficult decisions. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kieran surprised Josephine with a beautiful piano he had shipped from Denver. It was an extravagant purchase, but he said he wanted her to have something just for herself, something beautiful. Josephine cried when she saw it, then taught herself to play so she could fill their home with music. On Sunday evenings, the family would gather in the parlor. Josephine would play the piano while Kieran sang in his rough but pleasant voice. The children would join in, and sometimes ranch hands would be invited to share the music. Those evenings became the stuff of local legend, the Walker family musicales that were warm and welcoming to all. The chapel where Josephine had prayed and where she and Kieran had married remained important to them. They attended every Sunday without fail, and over the years, Kieran became a deacon, helping to maintain the building and support the congregation. Josephine taught Sunday school to the younger children, sharing her faith with the next generation. Sometimes, when services ended, they would stand outside the chapel and remember that first night. Kieran would take Josephine's hand, and they would walk home together, just like he had walked her home all those years ago. The children would run ahead, but the two of them would take their time, savoring the journey as much as the destination. As the children grew older, they began to hear the story of how their parents met. Thomas, at age 12, was fascinated by the idea of his father waiting outside the chapel in the dark. "Were you scared, Papa?" he asked one evening at dinner. "No," Kieran replied thoughtfully. "I was not scared. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, like my whole life had been leading me to that moment." "And Mama, were you surprised when you saw him?" Josephine smiled at her son, then at her husband. "I was surprised, yes, but also relieved. I had been praying for hope, for a sign that I was not alone in the world, and when I walked out of that chapel and saw your father waiting, I knew my prayer had been answered." Clara, now 10, sighed dreamily. "That is so romantic." "It was not about romance at first," Kieran said. "It was about doing the right thing. There was trouble in town that night, and it was not safe for a lady alone. I just wanted to make sure she got home safely." "But you fell in love," James, age 8, declared with certainty. "Yes," Kieran agreed, reaching across the table to take Josephine's hand. "We fell in love, not all at once like lightning strikes. It was more like sunrise, slow and steady and beautiful. Each day I knew her, I loved her more." "And you still love Mama now?" Little Sarah asked, age 6 and curious about everything. "More than ever," Kieran confirmed. "Love does not fade when you do it right. It grows deeper and stronger with time." Josephine squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with emotion. After all these years, he could still make her feel like a young bride. The autumn of 1893 brought changes. Thomas, now 14, was taking on more responsibilities around the ranch and showing the leadership qualities that suggested he would run the operation himself one day. Clara was 12 and helping her mother with the younger children and the household. James was 10 and proving to be the best horseman in the family. Sarah was 8 and already learning to read music. It was a golden time, full and rich, and Kieran and Josephine often marveled at the life they had built together. One evening in late September, 15 years after that first meeting, Kieran and Josephine rode up to the overlook where he had first told her he wanted to build a life with her. They had left the children in the care of one of the ranch hands, stealing a few hours alone together. They sat on the same rock where they had sat all those years ago, watching the sun set over the mountains. The aspens were turning gold again, and the air held that particular crispness that spoke of coming winter. "You remember sitting here with me?" Kieran asked. "When I asked you to let me court you?" "Of course I remember. I was so nervous I thought my heart would beat out of my chest. I was nervous too, terrified you would say no. Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder. I could never have said no to you. Not then, not now, not ever. We have had a good life, have we not? Kieran said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up at him. We have had a wonderful life. Why do you sound sad? Not sad, just reflective. I have been thinking lately about how fragile it all is, how quickly things can change, how blessed we have been. Kieran Walker, you are not getting morbid on me, are you? He laughed, the sound warm and real. No, love, I'm not planning on going anywhere. I just want you to know, in case I do not say it enough, how grateful I am. For you, for our children, for this life. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Josephine corrected again, as she always did. I would have been lost without you. You saved me that night, waiting outside the chapel. You gave me hope when I had none left. And you gave me purpose. A reason to put down roots and build something lasting. They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. After all these years, all these kisses, it still made Josephine's heart race. That night, back at the ranch house they had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, they gathered everyone for a family meeting. The children looked concerned, wondering if something was wrong. Nothing is wrong, Kieran assured them. Your mother and I just wanted to tell you all something important. We wanted to say how proud we are of each of you, Josephine added, how grateful we are for the family we have become. But mostly, Kieran continued, we wanted to tell you the story again. The full story of how your mother and I met, because it is important. It is part of who you are. So they told it, every detail. The prayer in the empty chapel, the violence in town that night, the man waiting at the bottom of the steps, the walk home through the darkness. The courtship that followed, the love that grew, the life they had built together. The children listened, rapt, even though they had heard versions of the story before. There was something different about the telling tonight, something more complete and significant. The point, Kieran said when they finished, is that you never know when your life is going to change. Your mother went to chapel that night just hoping for some peace, some comfort. She had no idea she was about to meet the man who would become her husband. And I was just trying to do the right thing to make sure a lady got home safe. I had no idea I was about to meet the woman who would become my whole world. So pay attention, Josephine added. Be kind. Do the right thing. You never know when a simple act of decency might change your entire life. And never stop praying, Kieran said. Never stop hoping. Even when things seem darkest, God is working. He was working that night 15 years ago, bringing two lost souls together. He has been working ever since, blessing us beyond what we deserve. Thomas nodded seriously, taking in every word. Clara wiped tears from her eyes. James was thoughtful, and little Sarah climbed into Josephine's lap for a hug. I want a love like yours someday, Clara said softly. Then look for someone kind, Josephine told her. Someone who sees you and values you. Someone who will wait outside chapels in the dark just to make sure you are safe. That is the kind of love worth having. And be someone worth loving, Kieran added, looking at his sons. Be honest and hardworking, be patient and faithful. The right person will see those qualities and treasure them. The years continued their steady march. The children grew into young adults, each finding their own path while remaining close to the family. Thomas took over more of the ranch management as Kieran began to slow down, not due to any illness, but simply the natural wearing down of a body that had worked hard for decades. Clara married a young man from a neighboring ranch, a gentle soul who adored her and treated her like a queen. They settled nearby, and soon Josephine had grandchildren to spoil. James went east for a few years to study business. then returned to help expand the ranch's operations. Sarah discovered a talent for writing and began sending stories to magazines back east. Kieran and Josephine aged gracefully together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes from years of laughter. They moved a bit slower, but their love had lost none of its warmth. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors, all came together to honor the couple whose love story had become legendary in Silverton. Reverend Matthews, now quite elderly himself, led a renewal of their vows in the chapel where they had married. Josephine wore a new dress in pale blue, and Kieran wore his best suit. As they repeated the same promises they had made a quarter-century before, there was not a dry eye in the congregation. Afterward, at the ranch, there was a huge celebration with food and music and dancing. At one point, Kieran pulled Josephine onto the dance floor and they swayed together while their family and friends watched. 25 years, Kieran murmured in her ear. Where did they go? They went into building this, Josephine replied, gesturing to their children and grandchildren. Into creating a legacy of love. Do you have any regrets? She pulled back to look at him, her green eyes still as bright as they had been at 22. Not a single one. Every day with you has been a gift, Kieran Walker. Even the hard days, even the days we struggled. I would do it all again exactly the same, as would I. He kissed her forehead. Thank you for coming outside that chapel. Thank you for letting me walk you home. Thank you for waiting. More years passed. Grandchildren multiplied and then great-grandchildren began to arrive. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, with James handling the business side of things. Clara was a devoted mother and grandmother herself, and Sarah's writing career flourished, her stories bringing pride to the family. Kieran and Josephine slowed down considerably, spending most of their time in a comfortable cottage on the ranch property that Thomas had built for them. They could no longer work like they once had, but they remained active in the community and the church. The chapel remained special to them. Even when walking became difficult, they made sure to attend every Sunday. The new generation of Silverton families knew the story of the praying woman and the waiting cowboy, and it had become part of the town's folklore. One September evening, nearly 35 years after that first meeting, Josephine felt the urge to return to the chapel alone. Kieran was napping in his chair, and she left him a note saying she would be back soon. The walk was harder than it used to be, her joints protesting with each step. But she made it to the chapel as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades that reminded her of that long-ago autumn. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The chapel had been improved over the years, with better pews and stained glass windows, but the basic structure was the same. She made her way to the third pew from the front, her old spot, and lowered herself carefully to her knees. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "I come to you with a heart full of gratitude. You have given me more than I ever dreamed possible, more than I deserved. Thank you for hearing my prayer all those years ago. Thank you for sending Kieran to wait outside this chapel. Thank you for every day, every moment, every blessing." She prayed for a long time, thanking God for her children and grandchildren, for the life she and Kieran had built, for the love that had sustained them through everything. When she finally rose, her knees protesting loudly, and made her way outside, she stopped short. Kieran was standing at the base of the steps, leaning heavily on a cane but standing tall nonetheless, a gentle smile on his weathered face. "Kieran, what are you doing here? I woke up and saw your note. I thought I should come wait for you, walk you home like I did the first time." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You foolish, wonderful man, you should not have made the walk. You need your rest." "I need to walk my wife home more than I need rest," he said firmly. "Some traditions are too important to break." She descended the steps carefully, and he offered his arm. They walked slowly through the town they had called home for nearly 4 decades, moving at a pace their aged bodies dictated but their hearts soaring. "You remember what you prayed for that first night?" Kieran asked. "Hope, direction, purpose, a sign that I mattered." "And did you get your answer?" Josephine looked up at her husband, at the man who had waited for her outside an empty chapel, and then spent the rest of his life loving her with steady devotion. "Yes," she said. "I got my answer. I got everything I prayed for and more than I ever imagined. I got you." They walked the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, hands clasped together, hearts beating in time as they had for 35 years. The years that followed were quieter but no less sweet. Kieran and Josephine spent their days sitting on their cottage porch, watching the ranch continue without them, enjoying visits from their ever-growing family. They held hands and told stories and thanked God for every sunrise. Kieran passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 1915, with Josephine beside him. His last words were, "Thank you for letting me walk you home, my love." The funeral was huge, the chapel packed beyond capacity. 3 generations of Walkers mourned a man who had been a devoted husband, loving father, doting grandfather, and pillar of the community. He was buried in the cemetery behind the chapel, overlooking the valley he had loved. Josephine lived another 5 years, spending her remaining time with her family, watching her great-grandchildren grow, and writing down the full story of her life with Kieran so future generations would know. She passed away on a September evening, peacefully and without pain, surrounded by love. Her last conscious thought was of a young cowboy standing at the bottom of chapel steps, waiting in the darkness to walk her home. They buried her beside Kieran, and the headstone read simply, "Josephine Walker. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother." Her prayer was answered. On warm September evenings, when the aspens turn gold and the air smells of pine and coming snow, people in Silverton still tell the story. They tell it to their children and grandchildren, this tale of a woman who prayed in an empty chapel and the cowboy who waited outside to walk her home. They tell how that one act of simple kindness blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime. How 2 people, each broken by loss and loneliness, found healing and wholeness in each other. How faith and patience and goodness were rewarded with a life full of joy and purpose. The chapel still stands, a landmark now, carefully preserved by the town. A small plaque near the door tells the story in brief, but the full tale lives in the hearts of the community. Young couples sometimes visit the spot where Kieran waited, hoping some of that legendary love will rub off on them. The ranch remains in the Walker family, passed down through generations, a testament to the life Kieran and Josephine built together. The cottage where they spent their final years is maintained as a family museum of sorts, full of photos and mementos and the written account Josephine left behind. And on Sunday mornings, the chapel still fills with faithful people seeking hope and comfort and connection with the divine. Sometimes a young woman will sit alone in the third pew from the front, and sometimes a young man will wait outside to make sure she gets home safely. Because the story of Josephine and Kieran taught the people of Silverton something important about love and faith and the power of simple kindness. It taught them that prayers are heard, that God works in mysterious ways, that waiting for the right person is always worth it. It taught them that true love is not about grand gestures or passionate declarations. It is about showing up, about waiting in the dark to make sure someone is safe, about walking beside someone through all the days of your life, in sunshine and shadow, in joy and sorrow, in plenty and want. It taught them that the best love stories start with prayer and patience, with seeing someone truly and valuing them completely. That love is built day by day through small acts of devotion and sacrifice, through working together and facing challenges as a team. The descendants of Kieran and Josephine Walker still live in and around Silverton, Colorado. They carry the story in their DNA, this tale of faith rewarded and love triumphant. They know where they came from, what their foundation is built upon. And sometimes, on quiet September evenings when the stars come out over the San Juan Mountains, you can almost see them. A young woman leaving a small white chapel, tears on her cheeks but hope in her heart. A young man waiting at the bottom of the steps, hat in hand, ready to walk her safely home. Two souls who were lost finding each other in the darkness, the beginning of everything, the answer to a prayer. A love story for the ages. They say every great love story has a moment when everything changes, when fate intervenes and two paths cross in a way that alters the course of lives. For Josephine and Kieran Walker, that moment came on a September evening in 1878, outside a small chapel in Silverton, Colorado. She was praying in an empty chapel. The cowboy waited outside and walked her home. And from that simple act of kindness grew a love that would last beyond death, beyond memory, beyond time itself. A love that would become legend, that would inspire generations, that would prove the power of faith and the beauty of two hearts beating as one. That is the story. That is the truth. That is the legacy of Josephine and Kieran Walker, whose love began in prayer and patience and endured through every trial until the very end. And the people of Silverton, Colorado, still tell that story on autumn evenings when the mountains catch fire with sunset. They tell it to remind themselves that miracles happen, that prayers are answered, that love really can conquer all. They tell it because it is true, every word of it. They tell it because some stories deserve to be remembered, to be passed down, to live forever in the hearts of those who hear them. This is one of those stories. The story of she who prayed in an empty chapel and the cowboy who waited outside and walked her home. The story of a love that changed everything.